After a lucrative career in marketing and corporate communications, Paola Gianturco knew she needed to leap into work that was more personal. She turned to her love of photography and took off on an adventure, traveling the whole world while documenting empowered women, photographing them and sharing their stories in their own words. She's published 5 photographic books. Her most recent is called Grandmother Power. The book features 120 activists. They are inspiring grandmothers working to make the world a better place for children.
I had worked in marketing and advertising and public relations and corporate communications on the business side for almost 35 years. And when I was 55, I did not only that work, but additionally, I was teaching at Stanford. At the end of that year, I discovered I had earned 1 million frequent flyer miles from doing business all over. And I was exhausted because I was doing 2 jobs at the same time. So I thought, I'm going to take a sabbatical. One year and do only what I love most and what I want to learn next. And what I loved most was photography and travel. And what I wanted to learn most, because I had spent my whole working life inside of large corporations, was about women who were running their own businesses, micro-enterprise, one woman at a time. So I invited a friend to go with me. She wasn't a photographer or a writer either, but together we had this idea that we wanted to do a coffee table book on my sabbatical. All of a sudden, I was a photojournalist. I never went back to business. I was having so much more fun than I had ever imagined you could have working, that now, 20 years later, I'm about to celebrate my 75th birthday this summer, and I will start on book number 6. I always start the individual interviews. I carry all of my books with me, and I always say, here are what my books look like. And many of the women whom I interview and photograph are illiterate, but they're very interested in these books because they're photographic. And often they become engaged and want to know the stories of the women in the books, and then want to be in the books themselves. I work very collaboratively with these women. And first of all, I always interview them before I photograph them. I never pick up my camera first. It's very important to me to represent those women accurately and as they showed themselves to me.
My granddaughter was 15 months old about when we did get her at the time when
Part of my discipline is to try to erase my American perspective and just simply listen and really try to hear them. All of my books have the women telling their stories themselves in their own words, and I send it back to the interpreter to go back to the woman and read it. I refer to my books as our books always when I'm communicating with them. And I have, as part of my publisher's contract, a deal that every group I work with gets a copy of the books. The nonprofits receive the money from the books. 100% of the author royalties from Women Who Light the Dark went to the Global Fund for Women. And they were wonderfully collaborative. They allowed me to read hundreds of grantee profiles all over the world. And when I selected the ones whom I wanted to include in the book, they helped introduce me to the women who ran those groups. So I collaborate with these groups, but they don't ever see what I am going to write. I was traveling in Africa. I was working in Kenya and meeting with a circle of women. I didn't even know yet that they were grandmothers. And I asked them to tell me how many children they had. And each of them answered in the same routinized way. They said, I have 6 children and 12 adopted. And then the next woman said, I have 4 children and 8 adopted. And the next one said, I have 4 and 13 adopted. And suddenly I realized that what they were really saying was that they were raising their grandchildren because their own children had died of AIDS. All over Africa, everywhere, I met grandmothers who were raising their grandchildren, and I left thinking, whew, the future of this continent rests in the hands of the grandmothers. The future of the continent. So it made me wonder what grandmothers were doing other places. And I came home and began doing research, and I discovered that grandmothers are doing all kinds of things to make the world a better place for their families and for their communities and for their countries and for all of us. So that was the genesis of grandmother power. When people think about grandmothers, they tend to think about people who look like Whistler's mother and sit in their rocking chairs and are all wrinkly and sort of invisible. And in fact, all of the stories in Grandmother Power are about energetic grandmothers who are simply determined to change the world because it's not good enough for their grandchildren. I had enough frequent flyer miles when that first book came out that I could invite 2 Ndebele women to come to New York. My pictures were also on exhibit that year at the UN. They sat under their own pictures, beading.
I would love to introduce you to the Ndebele women here.
And Kofi Annan came over to say welcome. And they couldn't stand up because they wear big bracelets that go all the way down their legs. And once they have them on, their legs are stiff. So there was no way to stand up and say hello to him. He sat down on the floor with them. Whenever something was not going on at the United Nations, we went off to see if we could sell some of their beadwork. And that involved hiring 2 taxicabs, 1 for each woman, because they had to sit in the back seat with their legs out in front of them with their bracelets. And when we got to the stores, which we hoped would buy their work, they would get out in their fabulous blankets and headdresses and looking amazing, and so dazzle everybody that they bought lots. So the women went back to South Africa with thousands of dollars for their villages that they would never have had. And of course, that was exactly what I hoped would happen. Women have been part of my working life from the beginning. My first job was with an organization called Joseph Magnin. It was the first retail chain to commit its whole focus to working women. My second job was with the first women-owned advertising agency in the United States. I also have been very conscious of the fact that women are in many cultures discounted and dismissed. And that made me mad. I mean, why is that? Particularly when women are making enormous contributions, both to their families and to their communities in the world. So I decided that that's where I would focus my work. And I hope that as women find out these stories, and the stories are told and retold, that things will improve for women.
That's it for this week. Join the conversation with us on social media. We are CCTV America on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. All of tonight's interviews can be found online on CCTV America's YouTube page. And let us know what you'd like us to take full frame next. Email us at fullframe@cctv-america.com. Until then, I'm Mike Walter in Los Angeles. We'll see you next time.